Welcome to this weekly feature where I answer 5 questions, or try to answer 5 questions that were posed by you. Some of these are more topics than questions because I got a lot of questions that are very similar and are about the same topic, so I sort of grouped them into a single topic. They were really fun. I have to tell you that I hope you enjoy them. I actually really enjoy reading your questions and thinking about the answers and then selecting them. And then it's really fun to do this and pass on my thoughts and then keep them coming. It's a really nice thing to have that interaction. So I hope you enjoy it. Another question that I got this week really has to do with cruelty and was specifically focused on the Department of Justice and the employees there and how they're being treated. But you could raise that same issue with respect to the employees in numerous government agencies who are being treated the same way. And the question is not just sort of the cruelty, but is there anything there's people can do? I'm going to discuss it within the Department of Justice because that's where I was and it's the part of the government I know the best. But to be clear, that what I'm going to talk about and the way they're being treated, as well as some of the legal remedies that they, I think, would have, are things that were generally applicable to all of government, all of the federal government at least. One of the things that Lisa Murkowski, the independent senator who generally votes with Republicans but is fairly independent, one of the things that she said is, look, a lot of this could be done legally if it was approached in a different way that complied with the law and would treat people with a modicum of dignity, which they're due as public servants. And I think that is just so important. It is so reminiscent of a very, very famous line that some of you will recall during the McCarthy era. And people say it was sort of the turning point. But whether it was or was not is not really relevant. But at some point during one of the hearings where Joe McCarthy and his staff were attacking somebody who worked for the Army, a low-level person, and casting aspersions on him. And apparently that violated an agreement they'd had not to do that. Joe Welch, who is the general counsel of the Army, had this very famous quote where he said, and I'm just going to quote it to make sure I get it right because it's usually a little bit bastardized, but he says, "Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last? Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last?" And I feel like that statement about having no sense of decency is reminiscent of what we're hearing from Lisa Murkowski, and I think it is going to be something that is going to be particularly relevant to what we are seeing and what we're going to continue to see. I talked recently about the really both immature and thuggish behavior of the president and vice president with respect to an international hero defending democracy, President Zelensky, where the same thing could be said about having no sense of decency. Recently, just to give you another example, the top spokesperson at the Department of Justice, that's a position that's called on to make many statements to the press in connection with all sorts of things that the department does. And this person, who is Joshua Steve, resigned just today. And he resigned talking about the, quote, toxic work environment created by the Department of Justice leadership And this is somebody who made it clear that he has worked in Republican and Democratic administrations for years. This is a public servant who does his job regardless of the administration that takes over. So it's not a political issue, small p or big P, and just says, I cannot continue to serve in such a hostile and toxic work environment, one where leadership at the highest levels makes clear we are not welcomed or valued, much less trusted to do our jobs. And I think that is, so important, this idea that the denigration of public service and public servants is something that we're seeing over and over and over again. And you know what? Even if you thought that people were not competent, or you thought they were being political, these are public servants and they're human beings, and they're entitled to, after, in some cases, decades of work for us, the public, and not being paid what they would get paid in the private sector. So it's not a money thing. That they wouldn't be treated with some level of dignity. Again, to quote Lisa Murkowski, who has always struck me as somebody who's decent. Even if you disagree with policies, there's a level of decency that is simply missing from the people who we are seeing selected to be in power. And again, I don't want to paint with a complete broad brush and say it's true for everyone, but it is something that is all too common in what we are seeing. Another example is in the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., in addition to having the chief of the criminal division, Denise Chung, resign because she says that she was asked to sign off on something that was simply legally deficient. There was no probable cause to seize an account that her boss, the interim U.S. attorney, wanted her to, and she was like, I can't do that, and she resigned. It turns out that two things. One, that's been reported that the interim U.S. attorney then just on his own went to court and said, so I'll just present it, and the court rejected it, saying in fact it didn't establish probable cause. So if all of the reporting is right, what Denise Chung is saying it was borne out by a judge who rejected the application. Gives you a sense of what's going on here. Also, the interim U.S. attorney demoted a series of senior people in that office, and their big crime, again, was that they worked on the January 6th case, which, to be clear, Amy Bove did the same. So the irony there is palpable. And of course, the interim U.S. attorney was a defense lawyer on those cases, so has a real conflict in making those kinds of decisions. But this goes to then the question, what can these people do? And here, if you are at the department and you are summarily fired without cause, in other words, nothing about your performance, that it just working on a case is not a performance issue, that of course means you can be fired. A performance issue means that you did something so egregious that you could be fired over it. Leave aside that that's not how anybody who's an employer, a responsible employer, behaves, absent the conduct being truly extraordinary. Usually, if it's somebody's falling below a certain level, they are given notice. Eventually, they're on what's called a performance improvement plan, where there's clear metrics that they're asked to meet. And you, as a supervisor, and I've done this and given people performance improvement plans, you're hoping that it works and they actually meet those expectations, because these are people who have devoted their life to public service in many cases, and you want them to succeed, and your job as a supervisor is to help them do that. And then, if and only then, they don't meet that, then you can take additional steps up to and including being fired. So that's just not what happened here. And you're seeing lawsuits like that already. And you're seeing judges say that what the government is doing is improper. There's lots of technicalities to this. Sometimes the firing is not coming from the agency itself, but is coming from OMB, and a judge in San Francisco, Judge Alsup, already ruled just today saying that that is something that is improper. OMB doesn't have that authority, so it was sort of the wrong agency to do that. But even if it had been the right agency, it wasn't based on merit. It wasn't for cause. These were just, it's obvious, these were just blanket firings. And that is not something that you can do within the civil service rules. So we're going to see lots and lots of lawsuits. And just to be clear, because of the cavalier way that this is done, and to sort of create the sort of public perception, and also to demoralize people and terrorize them, that's sort of the immediate consequences. But ultimately, with these lawsuits, assuming they win, and I think a lot of them they will, because these are firings not for cause. And that, by the way, could apply even to probationary employees, people who just started. It can't just be a random reason that has nothing to do with performance at all. And so I think, to get back to the point, I think one of the things is, long term, this is going to cost the government a ton of money. Because what is going to happen? And this happens when it's shown that an employee was wrongfully terminated. They get back pay. So this is what the government then gets. The government then does not have the work of that person during the entire time that the lawsuit is pending, and let's assume that's a year or 2 years, and yet they're going to pay that salary. So how is that something that is like Elon Musk, saying we're going to save the government tons of money? You know what? At point A, when you're doing these mass firings, it might look like that. But if you're doing it in this completely sort of cruel and blunderbuss way, ultimately, you're going to end up paying a lot of back pay and not getting even the work during that time period that you would have otherwise received. And these are people with really good skill sets. So this is an example of what I think, in my view, is sort of incompetence and cruelty, and ultimately self-defeating, even in terms of the stated goal of saving money. I think ultimately that's not actually the real goal. The real goal is actually deconstruction of American democracy. And sort of, just to be even more depressing, when you're doing this in agencies that are tasked with preventing crime up to and including terrorism, you are playing with fire. Something is going to happen, and you have not put the right people in place, and you have completely slashed and burned the people who are able to reduce the risk of that happening. And that is the consequence of what we're seeing. So stay tuned to this space. There are lots of lawsuits that are pending, and you can hear me talk about it here. And it's something that on my podcast with Mary McCord, Maine Justice, we definitely are going to be focusing on and continuing to focus on as Trump 2.0 progresses. Thank you so much for listening to my YouTube video. If you like it and you want to subscribe, the links are below, both to the YouTube channel that I have, but I also have a Substack, so I have additional material there if you like what's going on, or at least coming out of my mouth. The other is, I just want to thank you. I'm really amazed, both for YouTube and Substack. These are very new ventures for me to try and speak directly to you about what's going on, which I think is really important. So I just want to thank you very much for subscribing. And again, the links are below if you want to subscribe. You can also set an alert on YouTube so that you can know when I'm posting something new that might be of interest to you.